Okay, there we go.
Thank you. So Heidi and I are here tonight on behalf of Yes for Needham. Of course, as you all know, we are both also elected members of the Needham Select Board. That board has discussed and taken positions on this zoning before town meeting and as a ballot referendum. And so our positions on this issue are well known to people. We're really here to answer questions on this. And we're here to answer questions about the housing plan that was approved by town meeting. That is what's on the ballot next week. Is the housing plan that was approved. So it's a yes or no vote on that. This session is really intended to answer questions for people who have questions. I know that there are voters out there who do still have questions, and so we're happy to take those. I know that there's people on this Zoom who have a variety of positions already on the zoning. But hopefully we'll give people who still have open questions a chance to ask those questions first. Heidi, do you want to read the statement from the town? I think in light of the Milton decision, we just want to be sure that everybody is aware of the statement that the town has made.
Absolutely. Okay, so this was issued yesterday by the town manager's office. Earlier today, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court issued a ruling in the Attorney General's lawsuit against the town of Milton for failure to comply with the MBTA Communities Act. The ruling upheld the law as constitutional and stated that the Attorney General has the ability to enforce the law. The SJC also ruled the state's existing guidelines were not established under the appropriate administrative procedures and are presently unenforceable. The SJC's ruling does not affect the timing or conduct of the town of Needham's upcoming election. That special election will occur as scheduled Tuesday, January 14th, 2025. Voters will decide at the ballot whether to affirm or repeal the zoning bylaw adopted by special town meeting on October 21st, 2024 to create a new multifamily overlay district. And important voter information can be found online at the town of Needham's website at the town clerk's office. Governor Healey issued a press release following the SJC's decision that states in part that the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities is prepared to file emergency regulations by the end of this week, consistent with the court's decision, and that the emergency regulations will be effective immediately upon filing. The town will continue to monitor the state's response to the SJC's decision and how it impacts the town.
So in light of that, I think what I would also say is that we anticipate that it's likely that there will be another statement from the town tomorrow. If, as the governor indicated, the emergency regulations are filed tomorrow, which is what we're anticipating. We don't know what those regulations are today, so we don't presume to know what they are, but we'll see what tomorrow brings. With that, I think we're here to talk about housing, because the fact of the matter is that town meeting passed zoning related to housing for Needham. And that is in fact the question that's on the ballot. So when a referendum was brought, that referendum triggers a part of our town charter that puts in place a process that leads to a referendum ballot question, and that ballot question is in front of the voters on next Tuesday. If you have not voted yet and you happen to be holding an absentee or an early voting ballot at home, we would recommend at this point that you drop that ballot off at town hall. And we do hope that everybody takes advantage of an opportunity to vote either through the ballot that they've been mailed if they requested one, or through going and voting on Tuesday. So with that, I would love to open it up for any questions that somebody might have. We would ask that you raise your hand, by the way, and let me say that at the bottom of your screen, or at least on mine, it's at the bottom. There's something that's called React. And I click on that. And when I do that, an option to raise my hand shows up there. So if you want to raise your hand, or if you have your camera on, at this point, I can visibly see raised hands with the number of people who have cameras on. There are a lot of people with cameras off here tonight.
Yeah, it would be great if you could turn your camera on. We're all neighbors, and we're going to be seeing each other a lot. We don't want this to turn into a Facebook situation where people can't see each other. This is a forum for residents and neighbors.
All right.
Hey,
Stephanie.
Stephanie.
Hi, thank you for doing this. I'll just start off. So there's a lot of people that say to do the base plan and then see what happens and then change things. So I was wondering if you could give us just a perspective of how the process works for changing large areas with zoning. Because it seems like this obviously is a very big change. I think the last one was 2009. And, I can't help but wonder, like, if it weren't for the MBTA communities law that's here, would we be in this like, and I don't want to say situation, I'd say, like, the dialogue that we're having, like what's the process for those zoning changes if people want to say start small and then change later?
Heidi, do you want to talk because you had been part of a process earlier because we had already begun a process to talk about housing in Needham.
Sure. I think, thanks for the question, Stephanie. I think generally zoning is a really big undertaking. So typically, well, let me say the process for this zoning started actually in 2007 with a housing plan working group that put together a housing plan. There was a problem that the town wanted to study, which was a lack of housing. They did that for a year. They produced a housing plan. That is what the 2009 zoning changes were based on. And over the ensuing years, it appears that there really haven't been any changes based on that zoning change. And so, because the changes that were desired were not produced, another housing plan working group was formed to reassess the situation. They did that. That turned into, so that coincided with the establishment of the MBTA Communities Act. And that turned into the Hone Committee, which formulated these two plans that went to town meeting in October. I guess those are the first zoning things that I've been involved in. Of course, I've only been on the select board for 3 years, so that's not surprising. And obviously it is typically the planning board who would undertake zoning. This Hone Committee was a joint committee of the select board and the planning board. I guess the thing that concerns me is that Needham doesn't do anything without assessing the situation, with a lot of study and so on. So given the amount of study that we've put in, given the amount of resources that we've devoted to determining the capital impacts and all that stuff, we have a lot of momentum going on right now. And I think there's a growing recognition of the housing crisis that Needham is facing, that the state is facing, and the impact that that housing crisis will have for us long-term here in Needham. And so I guess what I worry about is that, I feel very confident that we already know that the outcome of the base plan alone will not produce much in the way of housing. It's true that there will be some units produced, but not many, certainly not enough to touch even Needham's needs. And so I fear that,
How do I get the,
I fear that the momentum for zoning changes later will be non-existent. It just takes a lot of political will because, obviously there's a lot of folks who don't want these changes to be made or any changes to be made. And that's, I'm not making a judgment about that. I'm just saying that it takes a lot of work to get the conversation started. And so I fear that if we don't do it now, we may not do it at all. Also, I would just say that we need the housing. We need the housing now. It's just like planting a tree, right? The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The best time to start housing starts was 20 years ago. The second best time is today.
This comes against the context. It's really interesting. We're Needham as a town, right? Established in 1711, and grew and grew and grew and grew over those years, really until the 80s. And then we kind of have stagnated, right? We've been bouncing around in about the same population now for a long time, while the local population has continued to increase. And that's why we are where we are. So truly Heidi's comment about, the best time to start was 20 years ago, but the next best time to start is now. We're part of an overall bigger picture. Other questions? And I'm sorry, I kind of left while Heidi was talking and sent 5 more emails to people who had
That's
asked
okay.
for the link within the last 5 minutes.
Okay, I see Mara raising her hand, like her actual hand. So
Hi.
hi.
Hi, Mara.
Hi. Thank you for holding this meeting. Can you explain, I don't understand as far as, right, certain parts of the housing is affordable housing. How does it stay affordable housing? Like, let's say I buy one of these, I qualify for that, and then one day I go to sell it. How does it stay that way and not just get sold for even more later on? And if you could explain that, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Affordable housing is deed restricted. So there's a certain amount of profit that a person who qualifies for those. Well, first of all, we're assuming that those are condos that you're talking about. In the case that you're purchasing an affordable unit, that would be a condo, and they are deed restricted, and there's a certain amount of profit that a person is allowed to take when then reselling that unit. Affordable apartments are just they're keyed to 80% of area median income. You have to qualify through the housing office to be able to rent those apartments, and then of course that situation doesn't occur. It just stays affordable.
Well, and condos also have pricing that gets set based on a formula related to that 80% number as well. And that applies going forward because it is deed restricted with that same kind of level of restriction. So as a town, these units that qualify for affordable housing as part of this, and this is not really the purpose of this particular zoning, but in our town, we have inclusionary zoning at 12.5%. Those will continue going forward with the deed restrictions on them.
Great question.
Good question. Yeah.
I'm just going to say, because there are a number of people here and I can't see all of you at once, if you want to ask a question, it's best if you use the little raise hand button, because that throws you to the top of our screen. Otherwise, I'm afraid I might miss people.
I
Don't
know
see
there are
anything.
some new people here who I haven't seen on other sessions.
Okay,
Dan.
one hand. You're muted, Dan.
Sorry about that. I'm supposed to know how to do that. But I'm a solid supporter of the plan. So if somebody's got another question, they should just raise their hand. But when people talk about affordability in this project, for me, one of the things I like to try to do is break it into 2 pieces, because the term affordable gets referred to a lot of the time about subsidized affordable housing, as the previous questioner was asking about what happens if I buy a subsidized affordable housing unit, and what are the rules for that. But the main focus of the project is actually what's referred to as market affordable housing. Now, market affordability is a highly variable term because it really refers to what can the person who's speaking afford to buy at the market or rent at the market for roughly a third of their income. So that varies, but it's clear that market affordability is out of control in Massachusetts because of the severe shortage of supply as opposed to demand. And the main aim of the MBTA Communities program is to increase the supply of market affordable housing, to try to bring that more into balance, both by adding units more in relation to the demand, and also from the simple fact that because you get to build the biggest single price obstacle around here to building housing is the cost of a building lot. And if you can build only one house on a $1.2 million building lot, which is the standard in Needham now, that says something about where the ultimate price ends up, which at this point is about 2.7 million. If you could put 4 units on the same lot, the land cost per unit is quite a bit less. So market affordability is a big element of the program. Thank you.
So I would say that everything Dan said is certainly true, but one of our biggest reasons for being behind this zoning is that it adds a different type of housing that there's not a lot of in Needham, right? In adding apartments, that's a different type of housing. There are a number of people in the area who are looking for that type of housing, and this offers a place where they might go. And we know we have businesses in town that would love to have workers who are able to conceivably get one of those affordable units in these. And if we don't start, there will not be any. So,
Yeah, I'll just throw in there that I think, we can't anticipate the mix of apartments versus condos that will be available. That'll be up to the landowner and the owner of the project. But I will just say that I think condos make excellent starter homes for young people, young adults, young families. That's where I got my start, and that's what enabled me to move to Needham in the first place.
other questions? And we sent 2 more invites. So, hi, Mara, again,
Sorry. Hi.
come on up.
It's
Yeah.
great.
So my other question is, right, it's one of these things where if you don't build it, they won't come, right? So you've got to build it for people to come and make it more walkable. But in the interim, people are going to have cars that are living in these units. And can you direct me where I can find plans where it shows all the parking is going to be for these? Is that included in the lot space? Because we can't park overnight in the streets in Needham. So, just the amount of cars and things like that would be coming in addition to the people.
Sure. Well, the parking has to be on the site. So there is no plan to remove the prohibition on overnight parking in Needham. The parking minimum for these buildings is lower than the rest of our area, the center area that has parking minimums. So typically it's been 1.5 spaces. The parking minimum here is 1 space per unit. So even if you're living in a 2 or potentially a 3-bedroom unit, you would still get 1 space. This is because this is meant to be transit-oriented housing. It's meant to appeal to people who don't want to have lots of cars, who are planning on commuting via commuter rail, for example. And in fact, some of the developers that we spoke to when we were talking through these regulations talked about other buildings that they have built in which they have simply put in a couple of zip cars in their lot that people that only residents of the building would have access to. There are a lot of ways to manage this. It's not going to appeal to everyone, but for those that it does appeal to, it is a good option. I think, part of what you might be asking about is aside from parking is traffic. And I just want to say that there are traffic and parking studies that we did as part of this process. They're available on the website. And essentially the parking studies show that Needham doesn't use all of the parking that we currently have. And right now the town is undertaking some different methods to try and sort our parking so that it is more appropriately used. That will help with allocating the parking. And then the traffic, part of the capital plan for the town, for our infrastructure plan, is mitigation of a number of intersections that were identified in the traffic study that will help to ease whatever potential increase in traffic occurs as a result of, frankly, just time and growth, whether or not these developments occur. So we're hopeful that all of that will mitigate that situation. Thanks for the question. Hey, Tom.
And just Tom, before you go, I do want to say, because I didn't think it was quite clear, Needham has actually done a couple of parking studies of our apartment and condos in town. And what we have actually found is that they are using fewer than 1.5. In fact, they're using fewer than 1 space per unit is what has been found. So we were comfortable when the planning board made a change to adopt the 1 space per unit for this based on the experience that has been had, even in not transit oriented buildings. So it's been very interesting. Tom. There you
we
are.
go. Yeah, yeah, my computer going sluggy. Sorry I was late. So this, you might have already asked this, answered this. People who are on the no side of this issue are constantly throwing up school burdens with the if this plan is adopted, and I don't know if you've already talked about that. The cost of the increase in student per class and all that stuff. Is
Sure,
there
it was-
anybody there from the? Go
There
ahead.
isn't anyone here from the school specifically. Did you have like a specific question, Tom, or did you just want us to kind of go through the justification?
Just go through it a little bit. I don't know if anybody else has been following. I've pretty much been following pretty closely, but I wanted to bring it up for the 45 people that are here. What's
Awesome.
the impact on schools going to be?
Sure. Marianne, do you want to start?
So the answer is the schools have taken a look at this, both before and after the school's demographer reported on the current numbers. There is data that's available on the town website as well related to impact on schools. And what we would say is that Needham had for many years sort of bucked the trend of the area, and we had continued to see things grow in terms of our student population, but that has dramatically slowed. And we hit a peak a few years ago, and then we're down during the pandemic and have not come back to the peak that we had post-pandemic. And what we're now seeing due to the economy, due to many factors, is a slowing in turnover of houses in town, which is resulting in an ongoing look that says student population will be declining over time. So effectively, what we would look at, or what we anticipate, is that the rate of replacement by adding some different housing units sort of compensates for the slowdown in the shift over in houses that has been seen. And both of those sort of weigh out, and we do not expect to see schools be over capacity or beyond something that can be managed with the tools that they have and the school master plan that's already in place that Needham is committed to. So, you know, that it sort of looks like something that says, okay, we see what it is. We will keep working on this. I know that people have observed that specifically, if you look specifically at forecast with current districts at schools, there are a couple of schools that look like they will be over capacity. There are also other schools that will be under capacity. So that says the school committee at the time will need to manage how those margins sort of work between different schools as we're going through this construction process over the next decade.
Yeah, and I think that one of the tools that I find to be particularly compelling in distributing the incoming students is the idea that all of these, the entire corridor of potential new development is within a buffer zone that's sort of equidistant from multiple schools. So that kind of real time, I don't know if you call on a yearly basis real time, but the distribution of students going to the schools can be based on the existing population at those schools so that everything can get kept level. And that's good for both the schools that are experiencing higher growth and the schools that are not. So, Michael.
Sorry about that. So quick question in terms of, it was very helpful with seeing the observer seeing the list of properties that are, you know, the most likely to potentially be part of this. Has there been any engagement with the property owners? I know a lot of them probably wouldn't want to commit one way or another, but do we have any sense of ones that have committed that would be interested in moving ahead with, you know, building housing anytime in the, you know, near future?
So I would say that the only place I think that the town is really aware of, because it engaged during the zoning process, were the folks at 100 West who wrote a number of letters to the planning board related to their property and to what they thought would be helpful there and appeared before the planning board. Other than that, you know, in my view, having been in this role for a while and on the school committee before that, the town has engaged with property owners, for example, on Chestnut Street. And the planning board has engaged with property owners on Chestnut Street. That area was rezoned back in 2009 in the hopes that there would be some redevelopment there, and that didn't happen. The incentives were not great enough to encourage that, and the town continues to talk to those property owners. You may recall that the property owner at Hartney Graymont had worked with the town several years ago. They had brought a project forward that was a 6-story building, and at that time, the town rejected that project, and you don't see this zoning bringing forward 6 stories. That was something that it seemed like was too much, I think, to people in the town. So yes, there's been a lot of discussion over the years, but no particular discussion at this juncture, except as people engaged with the process in whatever way they did at those public hearings.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just having a hard time seeing, you know, all the sort of the extreme positions in terms of all these houses, you know, all this housing that's suddenly going to appear. I'm just having a hard time envisioning where it's actually going to happen, given that there are active businesses in most of those locations. So it would,
This is why we've said that the process will be very slow.
so out of curiosity then, why was the number set as high as it is? If it's not, there's no way we're going to be at what, 3,000 units anytime in the foreseeable future.
Right.
Why was it set that high? Because if it seems like we could have done a lower number, which would have been.
Well, I can
wouldn't
answer that question, actually.
Yeah.
I think the reason is because in this process, part of the thing that we did was consult with developers and builders of various sizes. We were trying to find the tipping point that was the smallest density and height increases that we could make that would appeal, that would incentivize any kind of forward motion. So what we did was we found the area that we felt would be most beneficial to the town, that would be most beneficial for redevelopment, and that fit within the MBT community's quirks. And then we raised the amount of density and height to the point where it would be attractive. That results in a certain number of units. That's not, but we didn't feel like if we were to cut the density or if we were to cut the height just to manipulate this number, that I think I take your point that it doesn't really mean exactly what it says. It would make all of that area unattractive to develop. So we left it as it was, understanding that it is not going to all happen, but that if we can't get a developer interested, we won't develop. So
no, just to clarify, so the number of units was set. It wasn't, you weren't looking to set the number of units. You were saying you're looking to set the rules, and that number's derived from the
number of units comes from the law's compliance modeling. All of these units are set at 1,000 square feet to fit the model so that EOHLC can determine whether or not we've done enough to incentivize some development. They're not real units in that the developer or the parcel owner ultimately has control over how big or small these units will be. They don't account for things in the building like hallways or utility rooms or elevators, for example. So this number count is a little bit arbitrary in that it doesn't represent real units, but it does represent a volume of development that can occur across town. And so that's what we were after. And that's why, although we understood that that bottom line number of units was really going to catch people's attention, we felt that it was worth the trade-off because we wanted to have some real chance of making some of these things happen.
I
Thanks for
also
thinking.
want to say that that number, if you want to think about it maybe a little differently, it's a capacity number, right? It's the total capacity of what could happen in that area. But we do look at things, right? It includes the Roach brothers. They've just redeveloped. Clearly, they're not redeveloping, you know. It includes parcels like Stephen Palmer, which the town owned and just redeveloped, but include in the acreage because it's contiguous, but it's not ever going to be, so it's things like that that are in this number. One of the interesting things that I learned this week in a conversation, I will give a hat tip to Dan Matthews, is that in fact, if you go look at the capacity number in Lexington, which I know has been raised a lot, Lexington is a town sort of similar size to Needham, a little bit, few more housing units than we have. But their capacity with existing housing units of about 12,000 was 12,000 more units in the plan that they brought forward. So Needham's brought forward our plan with much lower capacity. And similarly, we expect to achieve fewer units actually being built. And as we said, over a longer period of time. So.
Donna,
Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of follow up on Tom's, question and Marianne's response about the schools, that there's so much misinformation, misunderstanding, talking about our schools. Literally just got a text message from somebody that says our schools are already beyond capacity. And I know that's not true. And I know that throughout the ages, my kids are well into their 30s now. And, while they were growing up here, Mitchell School had to add a 5th grade because there was that many more kids in the building at that time. 3 years later, the extra 5th grade classroom went away. The school committee, Connie, you can speak to this, forever and ever has dealt with fluctuations in the school's enrollment from one part of the town to the other part of the town. And at one point they redistricted. It was not an issue. Kids just went to Broadmeadow that, had been going to Mitchell School. So I think there's a real misunderstanding as to the current enrollment in the school system and the projections that are based on children who are living in town, who are, babies and, up through kindergarten age. And I don't know if somebody can speak to that to sort of kind of once and for all, sort of really lay the facts out there as to how many students we actually have and the projections, which I believe were projected to go down.
Sure. Well, the school enrollment, the most recent school enrollment projections have dropped slightly. They did not drop evenly across all of the schools. So that is certainly, something to keep our eyes on.
Which would be very typical. That's probably the way it's always been.
Right. The enrollment numbers that were forecast by the Hone Committee and RKG, the consultant who works with the state and used not only numbers unique to Needham and are in 6 of the housing developments that we already have and which already produce children that go to our schools, but also the state numbers and those numbers not only for Metro Boston, but also the greater metro area, but also specific to the number of children provided by housing developments as opposed to, say, single family schools, houses rather. All indicate that the number of students that we would be receiving from this plan is well within not only the capacity of the schools and the school master plan, but also within the deficit of the planned or the forecasted decrease in enrollment. So I don't know how much detail we can go into as far as the actual numbers. This is something that's going to be, I think the thing is that this is something that's going to be fluctuating every year, as it has every year since time began. What I can say is that Needham has been using our demographer, McKibben, who has been pretty much spot on for the past 15 years that we've been working with him. And that his participation has enabled the school committee and the Needham Public Schools to deal with all of the fluctuations that have happened over time. And that is what they will continue to do. As we just discussed, the pace of development is expected to be quite slow. It's true that there is, development of a certain amount that is allowed, but the reality is that that will be very hard to accomplish. I'm actually more on the side of being worried this doesn't go far enough. And so we're going to have a long runway to see each of these new developments coming online and to plan for the eventual enrollment of these children. I mean, the kids that we're talking about are not born yet. So there's a long way to go before we need to sort out which elementary school they're going to. I know that it's a lot of moving pieces, and I totally understand the concern because, I, like all of you, or most of you probably, have kids who went through the Needham Public Schools. But this is exactly what the school committee is there for. This is what they do. So
I think the idea that, that I've seen several people post that the schools are going to be suddenly overwhelmed, you basically just answered that it's just an impossibility. It's just not going to happen. Because
well,
that is a
people's levels of risk tolerance vary. So I don't want to make light of anyone's concerns, but I do think that they've been well addressed and addressed with data, addressed with as much scientific rigor as we can provide in this non-scientific kind of context. So thank you for that question, Donna.
Eric.
Hi, thank you for putting this. I wanted to get back to Michael's question about unit capacity, although it's somewhat related to the school headcount issue. Is the unit capacity, whether it's under the base compliance plan or the neighborhood housing plan, the 1870 versus the 3296, this is total capacity. It's not necessarily additional units on top of what's existing. Is that correct? So that the unit capacity for under each plan would require every single lot within the zoning district to be completely redeveloped to the maximum amount under each new zoning plan.
Yes.
Yes.
Every single parcel.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what sets capacity. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that because I think people have a misunderstanding that the 3296 means new units total as opposed to the complete capacity. Whether under the base plan or the neighborhood housing plan.
Thanks, Eric.
That's correct. Thank you.
I do just want to make sure that everyone's, I think that's an excellent point, but I do just want to make sure that everyone understands that this referendum vote that we're doing is not a choice between base plan and the neighborhood housing plan. It is between the plan that was passed by town meeting and nothing. Repealing the zoning. So just to make it clear, just in case there was any misunderstanding there. Oscar.
Hi, Heidi. And I was just going to follow up a little bit with what Eric and Michael had said to explain this 3296 number. And you've said it all, I think, pretty well. I would just put it another way, that it is a mathematical, theoretical test of the capacity of that site. And that when you look at the base plan and the neighborhood housing plan, the difference was when as Heidi said, we were looking to try and boost the density and the heights of potential buildings. And it was very carefully thought based on where all these parcels were, what they were next to, what the neighborhood scale was. And so it was sort of appropriately establishing what the thresholds were. So it was a balancing act. And then you run that through the model, and it's essentially what's the capacity over that undeveloped dirt. So it's a raw number. But it is interesting. It is simply the difference between, it reflects the difference between what the zoning would allow under each plan. And it was the determination of the neighborhood housing plan that we needed to set the thresholds high enough to incentivize something to actually change over time. That's all.
Thank you.
That's correct. And if people are wondering, there are already 775 units in that area. So,
Yes.
Mara,
So-
if we can hold on you for a second and go to Melissa and Terry first, since they've not had a chance to ask a question. And Melissa, if you're able to turn on your camera, it would be great when you ask your question.
Hi, yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Hi there.
I have a question. It's about school, so I don't know how much you'll be able to answer it. Although given your positions on the select board, you may sort of be aware on this, but I feel like there was a pretty sobering school committee meeting on Tuesday where Dr. Gudikantz was talking about the full year 2026 budget, and that budget projections they thought about a month ago in December, maybe even a little less, have now been significantly cut by, I think, about $2.5 million. And I believe, if I'm like understanding, that's resulting or could potentially result in a 20 to 22 FTE decrease across the district. And he made a couple comments, that this situation could impact class size in Needham. And that we obviously are in a situation of declining enrollment. And I know the projected students with the neighborhood plan aren't coming tomorrow, but just, when you listen to that, I listened to a recording of that meeting. He talked about cuts to programs. Again, class size could potentially increase. And that even like guidance counselor asks, I think they'd initially asked for 6, and I'd actually asked a question at one of Liz Lee's Zooms about some of the mental health support, and she had mentioned how they had asked for 6. That got cut now based on this new projection. They'll only be able to hire 1. And just wondering, does that like change any of this thinking? Like obviously if, even 30 kids were coming next year, that obviously, it seems like based on that meeting on Tuesday, that would be a really big strain on our school system. Again, I think Dr. Gudikantz said something like, this is probably the toughest budget. And he is, I don't know if he used the word worried, but he definitely seemed concerned. Again, it seemed like a very somber meeting all around when they were discussing the budget, and just curious for kind of your thoughts and just how quickly projections can change. Cause I think like on December 17th, they thought, they had $2.5 million more.
So I would just say that, first of all, with the budget, nothing is finalized yet. This is a work in progress. But I guess one thing that jumps out to me about this is that we keep talking about this plan and more housing as a cost to the town, when actually this plan and the housing that it would produce actually increases revenue to the town. It brings in more tax money that then goes to fund our schools. So both the base plan and the neighborhood plan are net positive for tax revenue that will then go to fund our schools. So I would just say that I think we all have to acknowledge that the very short term, whether that's because of the new administration coming in and some questions around that, or just general economic issues in this country, we are entering an uncertain time. The town manager the other night at our select board meeting said, the theme of last year's budget was uncertainty, and the theme of the year before was uncertainty. I think that remains. But what I can tell you personally is that one of the reasons that we keep speaking about the neighborhood plan and the housing plan as being an economic revitalization for our town is because it will come with increased tax revenue. It will come with increased spending by residents who work and that will revitalize our downtown. And when we talk about that, especially, it's important to remember that Needham has a split tax rate. So residents are paying one rate and our businesses are paying much more. So keeping our businesses healthy, providing customers, foot traffic, and also residential units is one way that we as a community can ensure that we are funding our schools. So I don't think that it's an insignificant concern at all, but I don't think it's a reason to put the brakes on new housing.
I also think
Thank
it's
you.
important to
Oh, go ahead.
recognize that we have both good budget years and more challenging budget years. And I know that we would all like to forget that there have ever been challenging budget years, but the answer is there have been challenging budget years. This looks like it is a budget year with more uncertainty, but what always happens is we start the process with a great deal of uncertainty and concern, and everybody is very careful about how the budget gets built and put together. And then we work that out across the distance of the next, 7 weeks to figure out how we come to a budget that can best serve the town. And we are required to bring a balanced budget, and I'm certain that the town manager will work, and then the finance committee will work to bring that balanced budget to town meeting in a way that can adequately meet our needs.
Thank you.
Terry, I'm going to go to Terry, and then I'm going to go back to Mara.
Hi, thank you. I appreciated your comment about keeping businesses healthy because I was reading a comment and I don't understand it based on everything I've been reading. That is saying that 60 businesses in town would lose their business. And I don't understand how that fits in with everything that's being proposed here. Are
Sure.
there businesses that are going to lose business?
So I can only assume what they're referring to is that there are areas in town that have been like, for example, Chestnut Street, where businesses exist today. And those areas have been rezoned to allow for floor to ceiling residential units. Now, there is an incentive built into this zoning for commercial units on the first floor, but it's not mandated. There are a couple of reasons for that. But the point is that so first of all of this is private property. There is no change mandated by the town. Parcel owners do not have to change a thing if they don't want to, which is one of the reasons why we think that things are going to move slowly, because they're getting rents already. Most of the business space here is fully leased. But it is possible, Terry, that someone could decide to turn over a parcel, and instead of putting first floor commercial in that building, they would just make it residential top to bottom. Now, as I said, there are incentives built into the zoning to try and keep that first floor commercial there. But if a parcel owner decided to change what was there and they decided not to put commercial on the first floor, they could. And so people have been casting that as businesses are going to be kicked out. But that is, in my opinion, not an accurate assessment of what the possibilities are. We know that there are lots of businesses that have struggled to make it in Needham because we don't have enough foot traffic to keep them, viable. Particularly, as I mentioned, businesses are paying a higher tax rate, and that comes through even in rents and leases. And so we feel that the give and take here, the provision of more residential units that provide more customers, that use more services, that go to the hospital, that go to the music store and take lessons and whatever, offsets the potential loss of some of those commercial spaces, especially when there are other areas. So for example, the center and Avery Square that have been exempted from the plan, specifically because we wanted to maintain that first floor commercial feel.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mara and then Zach.
Hi, thanks. So I wanted to, I'm a teacher, and some of the school things that were said by Donna, and I'm sorry I missed the other name of the person who spoke, a couple of people before me. But I'm curious to know, so a couple things. You keep talking about the demographer who's been talking about enrollment and projected enrollment and whatnot. And I'm curious to know, do they, not just a projection for total number of students might be coming, but I know that Needham is really attractive for the special ed services that they offer. And do they also, track for how many people they think might be coming that receive those services? Or how many potentially, could there be with all of the units if they were to, materialize? Because that takes up a lot of space. So you have issues with not necessarily capacity of students, but the special ed services often take up other classrooms where you have less students in them. And then you have a space issue in the buildings in general. So I'm just wondering, is that a factor that's being considered at all when they're talking about potential future enrollment of students in our schools?
It is.
So,
They not only account for special ed students, but the number that was used to account for students generally was nearly doubled, was 180% of what we expect. So I think it's fair to say that that would account for, as you mentioned, the capacity and the space.
I would also say that the planning that's gone on in the school master plan also presumes that there will be greater levels of need that will need to be fulfilled in buildings as they're being purposed for the schools. So,
Thank you.
Zach.
Thank you. Thanks, Marianne and Heidi. There's been a lot of talk tonight and also just in the general discourse over yes positions, no positions, about the fact that zoning was changed back in 2009 and not a lot of development has happened in those 15 or so years. It seems to me, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it, that I could be wrong, but standalone residential was not allowed in these zones even with the 2009 changes. I could be wrong. But now, as a result of either the base plan or the NHP, it's not only going to be allowed, but it's going to be allowed by right. So no special permit process. It's allowed by right with site review. It would seem to me, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it, that removing the special permit process and allowing this development by right is, I think we could all agree, is quite a significant change and certainly more attractive to developers than having to go through the special permit process. So when I hear folks talk about how nothing has changed in the past 15 years and nothing's going to change under the base plan, that seems a bit misguided, especially where the change between by right and special permit is a massive change. So I'd like you to please address that issue. I think I've laid it out, and if I haven't, I'd be happy to clarify.
No, I think that's a great question, and I'd be happy to answer. So when we talked with developers, we talked with small, medium, and large developers. Large is like, we're talking about like 400 units, basically not really what we're looking for. So we were trying to find, as I mentioned earlier, that sweet spot where we would keep as much of our existing zoning as we possibly could, tweak the zoning with density and height incentives, and then also this discussion of what a special permit means and what that costs in terms of time and opportunity for those developers and capital, versus the by right situation, which is mandated by the MBTA Communities Act. And so what we found was that for the largest developers, those who are doing 400 units or so, frankly, none of this really mattered. The density was too small. The height was too short, and they didn't really care about the special permit condition, because they have enough capital that they were able to buy property and then hold it for the year, whatever that it took to get the special permit through. And that was fine. And the risk to them was offset by the potential for profit on these larger developments. But the small and medium-sized builders really found themselves kind of between a rock and a hard place. Not only was it too expensive for them to buy and hold property during a special permit process that in some cases in Needham has taken a year and a half. That's not the norm, but the norm is a year. But also the return on that investment wasn't great enough with the density that was currently allowed, even by special permit, and the height that was allowed by special permit. So between the by right height, the incentive for the extra half story, the incentive of the additional density, which is not huge additional density, but it's enough, and the reduction of the regulatory burden from special permit to by right, we got to a point where they were like, yeah, I mean, it's probably going to be worth it. It wasn't a done deal. It wasn't a sure thing, but it was enough that we didn't want to raise the heights or raise the densities any further. And we wanted to see where this would go. And so that's the point at which we find ourselves. So thanks for the question. Anyone else? Stephanie.
Thank you. So I just wanted to kind of ask, when the vote happens on the 14th, in the event the no is victorious, what are the next steps? I know you said there would be a special town meeting on February 24th. Would it go back to voting again, the base plan, and then that would be it? And is it that the neighborhood plan would just be out, or would it be that you come back to the drawing board with something even further in the middle between the base plan and the Needham or the neighborhood plan?
Boy, I don't know the answer to that right now.
Yeah,
We would be totally speculating. What
Yeah,
we've
so
said is that the earliest the town could come back is February 24th. All right. Beyond
I
that,
think we should just say that this is, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but it's all contingent on kind of what happens in the next few days,
24 hours.
weeks. Like, for sure, we can say if no wins this vote, the zoning will be repealed. So we will go back to having none of this zoning. That is a for sure. If yes wins, then the zoning will remain. What we can say with any certainty with regards to the compliance or the non-compliance, that's all up in the air, as Marianne was saying, and I just interrupted. I'm sorry.
Well, and what we would actually bring back. I think I want to wait and hear what the emergency regs are that are published tomorrow. And we have not had any discussion of that because we're focused on affirming the vote of town meeting for the housing plan that we brought forward, which we think is the right housing plan for Needham. So
Right.
that's where our energy has gone.
And not only that, I would just say that whatever comes back that's the purview of the planning board. So that's their decision, and the select board doesn't, I mean, we can tell them our opinions, but we don't weigh in on that.
Jeremy. Hi there.
With what I heard about you saying that the future increase in the number of units is actually going to be a positive revenue generator for the town, how does that reconcile with the finance committee not being comfortable with the neighborhood housing plan and not being able to endorse it?
Well, the finance committee did have a split vote on this plan. It was 3-5.
I don't think that we can speak for the finance committee. So, they had indicated they were waiting for some other information. That's all we can say.
Yeah.
But the meeting at which they discuss this and vote is publicly available. You could watch it if you choose, hear them in their own words.
Thanks.
Questions? We're coming to an hour. I know that we had some other people I haven't seen on other Zooms, and possibly those folks might have some questions, but
I just want to thank you both for the session tonight. I have to drop.
Thanks,
Thank
Tom.
you very
thank
much.
you, Tom. If there aren't any more questions, then we're happy to let everybody go back to whatever their previously scheduled programming is before the referendum took over people's lives in Needham. And just encourage you to stay warm and to vote if you haven't yet. And take advantage of exercising your right to do that, and let Needham know whether you would like to affirm the zoning or not, that we both feel is the right zoning with the right plan for the town now. Thank
Wanna-
you all for
I want
coming.
to say how much I appreciate the conversation and sort of the calmness and sort of just conversation. It's refreshing, shall we say.
Thanks, Donna.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Night.
Night, everybody.
Everyone.